On the inflationary impact or otherwise of the budget, economists have mixed views on this. It is a disputed analysis. Some say it is, some say it's not. The RBA has indicated already that more rate rises are likely. So then how do you pin the blame on the government for any subsequent rate rises, given, as I said, the central bank has already indicated more are coming?
Well, Kieran, let me be very clear about this. It's hard to find economists who think that this budget is putting downward pressure on inflation. There's a debate about whether it's making it worse or it's neutral, but there's very few saying this is putting downward pressure on inflation, and that's because there's $2 of extra spending for every extra dollar of revenue, and economists like Chris Richardson have said, well, that is inflationary. Now, what we needed and what Jim Chalmers promised is a budget that was going to put downward pressure on inflation. He said that was the government's top priority. He hasn't delivered. That is very, very clear. Whether interest rates go up or not, that'll be up to the Reserve Bank. What's very clear, though, is they've failed to put that downward pressure that's required. And what ends up happening is you end up with a situation where the Reserve Bank has the foot on the brake at exactly the time when the government has the foot on the accelerator. And of course, when you do that, you wreck the engine. Now, that is the sad reality of what we've seen in this budget, and that will hurt middle Australia. Let's be clear about that. In mainstream Australia right now, we're seeing enormous pain. A typical family with a mortgage, $25,000 a year worse off than they were a year ago when Labor got into government. We need to see a government that genuinely treats this as its top priority. It doesn't just talk about it. There's a lot of talk in Labor, but not the action that is needed to put that downward pressure on inflation. The truth is, inflation is coming from Canberra now, not from the Kremlin, and Canberra needs to deal with it, and that's what they failed to do in this budget.
Well, the government's response to that would be, and as we heard earlier from the Minister, that they've banked 87% of the upgraded revenue stream that they've seen from the October budget and the budget here last week. Is that not a fair way to try and put some downward pressure on inflation?
Except that that's not right. So they've added $185 billion of spending. About 140 of that they've kind of forgotten in that analysis, they've ignored. When you add $185 billion of spending, you're not putting downward pressure on inflation. That is the truth of the matter. And when there's $2 of extra spending initiatives for every saving initiative, you're not putting downward pressure on inflation. And that's why so many economists have said this is not a budget that's putting downward pressure on inflation. And look, the real missed opportunity here was there was a chance for Labor to deliver a budget that was good for every Australian. When you can get downward pressure on prices, on energy prices, on groceries, on everything across the board, then you help everybody. But right now, inflation is hurting everybody and is across almost every good and service. And so they miss that opportunity. So instead of dealing with the source of the problem, they're now dealing with the symptoms. They're putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. And that's not where they needed to be. And sadly, all Australians are paying a very high price for it. They're feeling that pain because this government is not taking responsibility.